in the case that South Africa has brought against the state of Israel, the genocide case, and the World Court will decide whether to order emergency measures relating to Israel's military action and the war in Gaza. Now, we've also learned that South African Foreign Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor will travel to The Hague to be present at the court as it delivers its announcement. Now, taking a look ahead of the outcome of the case that South Africa has brought out at the ICJ, we are joined by Naeem Jeenah, who is a senior researcher at Mistra. Naeem, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Well, after all the hype surrounding the case, after the submissions were made by both South Africa and Israel, tomorrow is going to be absolutely important. The eyes of the world once again focused on The Hague, and it's going to be quite interesting to see what the ICJ is going to decide.
Yeah, it will. I think in the history of the ICJ, this is probably the most looked for ruling that's going to come down. So tomorrow, certainly, I mean, if we looked at the pictures when the hearing took place, the courtroom's actually quite small, and the interest that this has generated is huge. So I think a good part of the world tomorrow will be watching for that ruling from the ICJ.
Yes, and as you mentioned, The Hague in itself, and I mentioned Dr. Naledi Pandor, and I've actually seen this notification that has come about, and it has been obviously quite featuring very prominently on social media in terms of the entire process, in terms of availability, in terms of accreditation, all of that. And the ICJ is actually gearing up for this, and for the reasons you mentioned, huge, massive international interest on the outcome tomorrow.
Yeah, I think one thing I just want to say about this interest is that to a large extent the interest is very political. It's political because not of the Palestinians and the genocide against the Palestinians. It's political because of who the kind of defendant is, and that's Israel, regarded as part of the global north, the Western state, supported by other Western states, and that's what for the global media, certainly the Western media, that's what makes it interesting. The Palestinians, for many of them, are a footnote to that story. Of course, I think for the global South, to a large extent, it's different. It's Palestinians and it's South Africans that make the difference. But put together, it has generated that interest here.
Yes. Now, let's just try and understand and try and unpack in terms of the expected outcome. And the key issue here is the emergency measures that South Africa had proposed and articulated in its case. And I think a lot of focus is going to be there. The second issue, obviously, is the ceasefire, the call for a ceasefire. Now, this is going to be quite interesting to see in terms of how the ICJ has actually viewed South Africa's submission, but also in terms of these two critical, important aspects that South Africa had raised and has been asked for, and has asked for.
So the provisional measures that South Africa has asked for, there are 9 of them. And if we to group them, essentially we could say 2 big themes there in terms of the 9. One is a cessation of hostilities by Israel, and the second one is the facilitation of the entry of humanitarian aid, unhindered humanitarian aid. Those are the 2 broad kind of themes within those 9. Let me just say on the first point, the issue of cessation of hostilities. The reason I'm putting it in that way is because that's what is being asked for. Hamas is not a state, and therefore, not being a state is not a signatory to the Genocide Convention or is not a member of the ICJ, and therefore the ICJ can't make rulings against Hamas. And so the South African application is not really calling for a ceasefire because that implies 2 sides. It's calling for a cessation of hostilities by the Israeli side. So I think this is a technical point that's important to note. However, just to conclude on this point, Hamas has said, and Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, said so in a speech a few days ago, that the movement will accept whatever decision the ICJ reaches, and that if it decides that there should be a cessation of hostilities, then that will, as far as Hamas is concerned, it will apply both ways. So what they are saying is that if the court decides that Israel must cease hostilities, Hamas will do so as well. So I think that that's an important point. The second thing, the second theme, as I said, from the 9 provisional measures that are being asked for, is that of humanitarian, the facilitation of unhindered humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. Now, if I can just say that what's interesting also about and the anticipation about tomorrow's ruling is that the court, it's not for the court, it's not a black and white thing. It's not yes, South Africa is right, or no, South Africa is wrong, or the other way around, Israel is right or Israel is wrong. The court could say that there's no merit to South Africa's case. There's one option, of course, and that there's no possibility of a genocide, and therefore throw everything out. This is, I think, highly unlikely. The other option, of course, is that the court rules that there is there's sufficient of a justification that there might be a case to be heard on genocide, and therefore, that process around deciding whether it's genocide could take another 2, 3, 4 years, and therefore there should be provisional measures that are put into place, and accepts the 9 measures that South Africa has proposed. The third option is that it says the same kind of thing and accepts some of the 9 measures. And the fourth option is that it says the same kind of thing but puts into place its own provisional measures. This is also possible with the ICJ. So it might, for example, say, yes, there's a case to be investigated on the issue of genocide, which, as I say, the investigation will take a long time before there's a ruling. And in the meanwhile, there should be provisional measures, and the provisional measures could be something as mild as suggesting or ruling that Israel must ensure that its acts are not genocidal, and Israel must facilitate the entry of aid without going into further detail. I think that would be the worst possible outcome, because many people are hoping that the ruling from the ICJ tomorrow will be much stronger than that, and effectively call for Israel to stop its bombing campaign. But there's any number of possibilities about how it can rule.
Well, they're talking of number of possibilities, and as you mentioned that Ismail Hania, you speak about Hamas saying that they will accept the ICJ ruling, but again on the side of Israel again, and we've seen the arrogance of Israel. We've seen, we know it's very unclear whether Israel will actually comply, considering that the rulings of the ICJ legally are binding, they without appeal, but at the same time, obviously we know that the court has no way to actually enforce them. And Israel using all of this to display this open defiance, this arrogance that it has always done, whether it's been at UN level, UN resolutions, we've seen that over and over again. And, how different is this likely to play out as far as the arrogance and the defiance of Israel is concerned in the face of a ruling by a global institution like the ICJ?
Well, it's Inayat, it's not unclear. I mean, Netanyahu has emphasized the clarity of his position as the prime minister, and that is that he doesn't care what the ICJ is going to rule. That his campaign of bombardment against the Palestinians in Gaza will continue, and despite whatever the Hague might say, paraphrasing him slightly. So it seems that if the ICJ were to take a position that Israel should cease hostilities, the only way that will be effected from Israel's side is if Netanyahu is no longer prime minister. That is a possibility, of course. I don't think that's a possibility by tomorrow, but it's a possibility in the next weeks. But as long as Netanyahu is prime minister, he's made it clear that as the head of the government, he's not going to accept any ruling that says that he must that they must cease the attack against Gaza, and he will continue.
Yes, and just looking at where does this place South Africa, and you mentioned that this is political and it's highly political as well, and not only from Israel's perspective, but also from the United States of America. And we also learned about 210 U.S. lawmakers, members of the Congress, lambasting South Africa, venting their disgust at South Africa and this genocidal charge against Israel.
Yeah, look, I think South Africa has the South African government certainly did all its calculations well before it decided to launch this application, and those calculations would have included political and diplomatic calculations and the diplomatic fallout from it. I don't believe that South Africa is too concerned about any diplomatic fallout from Israel itself. I mean, nothing that Israel can do at a political, economic level makes too much of a difference to South Africa in terms of direct relations. We don't really care. Our economy is not seriously affected even if they decide to pull out completely from South Africa, which they won't do because I believe that they benefit more from South Africa than we do from them. So we don't have much to lose there. But I'm pretty sure that the South African government, before it made its decision, also considered the potential fallout from other sides, and particularly the United States, perhaps less so the European Union, but particularly the United States. And the calculation is that I believe, this is not something I've been told directly. The calculation is that the fallout won't be significant enough that we can't weather that storm. So 200 Congress people, I think it's all men, 200 congressmen protesting against South Africa. It doesn't mean too much if the administration just overlooks it. And we remember that there was a kind of a bit of a touch and go situation with the Ukraine thing and the position that South Africa took on that issue, where there was the threat, that possibly the US could reconsider South Africa's AGOA status, and South Africa sent a delegation there and ironed things out and placated people, etc. And there were no consequences of that. In fact, not too long after that position taken by South Africa, which the United States particularly didn't like, the AGOA forum, next AGOA forum was held in Johannesburg. And from all accounts, it seemed to have gone pretty well. And there was no negative repercussions of that for South Africa. That, I think, for the United States is a bigger issue than this particular one. So I think that the calculations were well done, and I don't think that we're going to be seeing any significant concrete kind of negative repercussions for South Africa. But of course, when before South Africa decided to launch the application, this was all very dicey. It was a gamble. And I think that the South African government should be praised and complimented for the fact that it decided to take the gamble, that it decided that our constitutional values are more important than any potential fallout that might happen, whether it's economic or in real terms. It's not just economic for the country, of course, or diplomatic for the country. All of the people whose names are being mentioned face very real personal negative repercussions as a result of this. Whether we're talking about Minister Naledi Pandor or her Director General Zain Dango, the two of whom seem to be at the forefront of this, or other DIRCO officials, or for that matter, the President, who's really stuck his neck out on this issue in a way that he hasn't stuck his neck out for many other things. And all of them, I think, understood before the application was launched that there's very real possible personal repercussions for them as well. And so I think that the courage of them as individuals and them as state officials or members of government is very kind of admirable. And what we saw subsequently, of course, is that that application, in a sense, highlighted the divisions in the world. A good part of the global south came out without too much difficulty, supporting the South African position. And the global north either remained silent or supported Israel, supported the genocide and defended the genocide. And so, the kind of support that South Africa has received from the states in the global south and the people of the global south, as well as the peoples of the global north, I think is pretty significant and highlights the importance of us standing by our constitutional values.
Well, name comes 2 p.m. tomorrow, inshallah, all will be revealed. And I'm sure all of us will be having our eyes on The Hague and the ICJ tomorrow afternoon. But for now, Jazakallah, we thank you for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Naim Jeenah with us, head of what to expect at the ICJ, the outcome of South Africa's case against Israel. We're going to go for a break. We'll be back.